Welcome everyone to the New York Alternative Investment Roundtable's inaugural Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Workshop, Every Message Matters, leveraging your leadership in person and on screen. I'm Mithra Warrior, a member of the New York Alternative Investment Roundtable Management Committee, and I'm very happy to be serving as moderator for today's discussion. In my day job, I am U.S. Head of Prime Brokerage Sales for TD Securities, where I'm also a member of TD Securities Women in Leadership Employee Resource Group and a co-chair of TD Securities Minorities in Leadership in the U.S. These are perspectives that I hope will add to today's discussion. Before we get started, I'd like to take a moment to thank the Roundtable sponsors. We're thankful for the continued support of such a wonderful group of actively involved sponsors in the industry. Now, a few logistical issues. If you have not participated in one of our virtual events before, I'd like to draw your attention to the chat function that you'll find at the bottom of your screen. You can use this to ask questions of our speaker, which we encourage you to do. Today's speaker is Rollie Mayer, principal of Rollie Mayer Consulting and a senior fellow at the Logos Institute for Crisis Management and Executive Leadership. She is an advisor, coach, educator, and speaker, serving corporations, private firms, governments, and individual executives. She's also a professor of leadership at Columbia University's Fu Foundation School of Engineering and Applied Science, and is a frequent presenter in the MBA program at Columbia Business School. She's also served as a presentation coach for New York University's Stern School of Business and taught courses on presentation and effective communication at NYU's Marketing and Management Institute for 20 years. Rollie is a member of the Forbes Coaches Council and has been featured in Fortune and the Oprah magazine, and Entrepreneur's Leading Women in Business, and quoted extensively in the Wall Street Journal. She's also on the Leadership Council of the Financial Women's Association and a founding member of Women in Sports and Events, a professional organization for executives in the industry. And before we turn it over to Rollie, I just would like to say, Rollie, thank you for being here with us. And today's topic is very important because over the last 10 or 11 months that we've been in a remote environment, there's been a lot of focus on how people have been able to do their jobs very well. But there has not been as much of a focus on career development and how to handle that in this new world that we're in. And when you and I were speaking, we talked about how the fact that the way we work might have changed, but the principles that underlie career growth and leadership development haven't. And so really excited to hear from you today and have an interactive discussion. And I'll turn it over to you to talk a little bit about what you practiced, some of the presentations that you've done, some of your hallmark presentations, and then we can just continue and have an impactful and interactive dialogue. So thank you, Rollie.
Thank you, Mithra, and delighted to be part of the roundtable. I feel like I should be in armor or with a long flowing medieval dress. And dress is one thing we're going to talk about today because every message does matter. The verbals, the non-verbals, and the social nuances. The interesting thing, and then I'll tell you a little bit more about what I do and who I do it with, is as we advance in our careers or as we aspire to advance in our careers, the technical skills matter less. Now, I'm not suggesting they don't matter, but the softer skills, the social skills, the command of a room, the facility with every kind of interaction becomes more and more important because the technical skills are assumed. You've already proven them, and you're probably going to be in a position to supervise or manage or coordinate people who are demonstrating and whose primary role is to execute those skills. So that's the thing I would like you to remember, that technical will take you only so far. And in my work, I really focus on three areas. One is powerful presence. The second is precise communication. And the third is positive relationship management. And today, pulling from a few of my signature programs, one, Getting to Gravitas, since I'm known as the Gravitas guru. The second, the 7 Ups of Successful Leadership. Yes, 7. And third, RQ, or remote quotient, raising your reputation online, which is pretty much where we're at right now. So, Mithra, do you have any burning questions to start off with? Because I believe we have a poll prepared, and thank you, Britt, for managing that technical aspect of the program, which is definitely not my strong suit.
I'm curious to see where the poll takes us.
So we have a few questions here. Let us know. I guess I should vote too.
If there are people who answered that second question saying they should get an Oscar, they should teach our next master class. I want to know who those people are.
Yeah, I'd like to meet them too. There are always a few award winners.
Yes. And I'm curious about their lighting. All
right. Exactly. So interestingly, but not surprisingly, the first two, the middle ground has it. Now here's the good news and the bad news. Yes, you may be better off than those who would rather do anything, the proverbial root canal. And pardon if there are any dentists or those connected to dentists. I actually don't mind root canals, and I particularly love performing, as you can tell. Most people are neutral or decent. And here's the bad news. That is equivalent to fine, right? You give a presentation, you ask how you did, and people say, fine, it was fine. Well, I got news for you. Fine is a 4-letter F word. And I prefer the other F word because at least it's interesting. Fine and neutral and decent are not enough. And those of you who honestly said, don't ask and heck no, I'm totally sympathetic to that. It is not everybody's thing to put yourself out there, to be public, especially on a small screen. And we'll talk about ways that will build effectiveness and probably confidence. But the secret to everything I talk about today, you may not be comfortable with things that I recommend or research that I refer to, but the key isn't feeling comfortable. The key is effectiveness and feeling confident. And then in the third question about gravitas, here's the surprising fact, and maybe some of you considered this already. All 3 answers are correct. They're correct. And confidence really is the foundation, but notice carefully, I said, or I wrote projecting confidence. You may not be confident, but the incredible advantage is that once you practice some of the behaviors that I'll talk about today or build awareness, you may start out feeling uncomfortable and underconfident. But once you internalize and begin to demonstrate those behaviors, it's like practicing presentation or practicing a sport, you start to feel more natural. It starts to become more routine and less scary, and definitely more effective, because that confidence, that projection of confidence, is a huge component of gravitas.
So this is the polls, I think, are a great segue into the bulk of what we talked about in terms of getting into today. And the reason we position this as a diversity, equity, and inclusion workshop is because some of the topics that you talked about, projecting confidence, being okay, not being okay with fine and neutral, are, for a lot of times, for underrepresented people, are difficult to grasp. I think depending on, if you're a certain gender or a certain culture, for example, you're raised and told not to call attention to yourself, to just blend in and to be fine. And so the concept of fine is not good, neutral is not good, can be shocking for some of us. And I think the idea of projecting, I think a lot of times people confuse projecting confidence with boasting or bravado. And I think that is, again, challenge for people. And now there are a lot of people who are okay being in this remote world, but don't want to call attention to themselves, but now don't have a choice. So a lot of what you talk about is not only is it applicable to everybody, but I think particularly from a DEI perspective is very resonant. So it's a great start. So would love to hear some of your thoughts, Raleigh, on, you talk about, so all those people who answered fine and neutral, or I come across okay, no one's complained. What's the next step? Where do we go from here?
Well, first I want to briefly respond to what you said, and it's very important to recognize, and I do work that I call inclusive leadership, that there are double standards and there are biases, and we'll never entirely get away from that. But if we hide, if we minimize ourselves because that feels safer, yes, it may be safer in terms of extreme judgment. To your point, we don't want to demonstrate arrogance or have a reputation for excessive self-promotion. But when we stay in the back, whether that's the back of the meeting room or on a video, whether that's staying silent or not contributing to the discussion. It's really interesting, and there's been research done by a colleague of mine, someone I actually grew up with and used to play Barbies with, Amy Edmondson. She's the head of leadership and management at Harvard, and she's actually done studies that prove that most people are so afraid to take risks because they feel that will endanger them, risks in terms of speaking up primarily, or speaking truth to power, that reluctance, that reticence, and that risk avoidance is actually more damaging or limiting to careers than speaking up and occasionally being wrong or saying something irrelevant or unpopular. So that's really important to keep in mind, that yes, you take risks when you speak up, when you establish yourself, when you take a lead seat at the table, when you volunteer to lead a committee, but you actually lose more and your organization loses more when you hang back. So here are some things that both relate to RQ, remote quotient, but are also true, as Mithra said, in every environment and all business interaction. And by the way, the first thing is we're broadcasting from home. So I want to mention, or most of us are, maybe some of you are in the office, you definitely want to set the stage. And I'll tell you why, as soon as my cat gets off one of my props, because this is the other issue about working from home, you're going to have interruptions. You know, a delivery is going to arrive, a child or a pet is going to present themselves. Sometimes the technology may fail. So we work around it. And, you know, there's something, excuse me while I remove my friend, there's something very humanizing and equalizing about managing some very private situations that we might prefer not to bring forth to our colleagues, but I have found that this has built relationships and deepened relationships. We've gotten to know each other better, and we've had, you know, evidence and opportunity to see people as they are. And here's a formula I want you to understand. It's based on research at UCLA by a psychology professor. And it's what I call the hierarchy of impression making. And this is the foundation for what we talk about next. I'm going to hold up my handy dandy visual 55, 35, 10. 55, 35, 10. I'm sure everyone in your field can add that up. 55% of impressions we make are based on one thing. And if you want to guess, or if you know, feel free to put it in the chat and we'll see how well you know this research. 55% of impression making. Body language is definitely part of it. Thank you, Deborah, which is under a larger umbrella and awning. Visual presence, yes. And appearance, exactly. So it never takes long to hit the bingo. body language, presence, appearance. Now, when we say appearance, we're not talking just about how pretty someone is, how tall they are, their hairstyle. Those things do factor in, but that's not the primary concern. It's the presence. And that presence is really your bearing, everything from body language to posture. And on the video screen, it's also what's behind you. I choose something colorful because that's my brand and my style. You want to be aware that clutter in the background, too much busyness, certainly any signal that you are not organized or sloppy is very disadvantageous. So every visual is going to send a message. And what's really terrifying, if you are new to your audience, or in the case of the video conferencing, every time you sign on, the first impression that's made, the judgments people make about us, happens so fast. They've studied this at Princeton. I'm dropping a lot of school names, but the research and the science is real. We decide in a fraction of a second. It's so small, it's like, the number pi, it just goes off into many decimals. We decide how likable someone is. We decide how smart they are. We decide how trustworthy they are, which is shocking, but it's true. So everything from posture to body language to expression, and yes, how we put ourselves together, are going to send messages. Now, 35, the second tier of impression making. What might that relate to? And that's a little later in the interaction, but not much later typically. What do we respond to or judge about someone, whether it's conscious or not?
I'll take a guess if there's no suggestions. I guess
go for it.
There you go. Oh, there we go. We have some suggestions.
Yep. Yeah, exactly.
Tone of voice.
It's the communication itself, and specifically tone. So first we've got the visuals, and then we've got the vocals. So in terms of tone, are you audible, number one? Is there energy in the voice? Is there range and dynamic? Because we all know monotone is impossible to listen to. People who shout and have too much volume are overwhelming. Those that are so soft-spoken, we really have to strain to hear them. We sometimes tune out. And the dreaded upward inflection. I'm Raleigh Mayer, and I'm an expert in communication, and I'm so glad to be here. That's an exaggeration, but many, many, many people, more women, but also men, have that habit, no awareness of it. So I beg you all, record yourselves, ask close colleagues, or friends or family members to tell you the absolute truth. Do they hear that in your voice? Because that can be a career killer, which not only signals lack of confidence, but if you're questioning yourself when you should be making a declarative statement, I recommend our experience shows, and you're saying our experience shows that we need a higher budget, then all is lost. And then we have 10% left. What's that for? We've got the packaging, we've got the audio, and it's the content, exactly. And engagement, I think it was Amy who said that, engagement is a big piece of this. And that's also a major component of gravitas. The interesting thing is when your visuals are effective, when your tone of voice is engaging, enthusiastic, structured to be interesting and appropriate for the listener in terms of content, then you've got the whole package. Now, this research doesn't suggest, and I would never put forward the idea that content doesn't matter. Of course it does, or you have nothing to offer. But what's really interesting is that if the content isn't packaged well, the value stays around 10%. But if your visuals and your tonals are effective, you get 100%. And by the way, if you're on the phone or conference call, the research hasn't been done as far as I know, but of course the audio, the weight of the audio expands significantly. So the tone of voice is critical. And I know of people who have lost opportunity, whether that's a job, whether that's an appointment or nomination for a special team or project, because they just haven't signaled interest and energy, even if they were interested and motivated. So again, it's the demonstration. And we can say, well, that's not fair. But if your externals don't represent your internals well, it doesn't matter how motivated and dedicated you are. And that's part of that seesaw of the technical, the internal versus the external. We can be really talented, really smart, have significant achievements, but if we don't have that presence, if we don't have that packaging, and I work with a lot of people who are in that situation, some who come to me privately because they know or they've read in their reviews that that's career limiting, or a business head or an HR representative will invite me to work with someone who has all the talent, but they don't demonstrate it. They're not commanding a room. They might not be leading a team effectively, or there's a great concern about their confidence in presenting to a board in client-facing situations. So again, packaging matters.
So that's a very interesting point about packaging your content, because it's a wake-up call for all of us, like myself, who for a long time thought, or still continue to think, well, I'm just going to put my head down and let my work speak for itself. Or I'm just going to, people are going to recognize that I have the knowledge in this. And I find that fascinating, because that's, you know, it's very interesting, because there's still so many people out there with that thought of mind, well, my work will just speak for itself. My knowledge will just speak for itself. So the packaging of your content is, I think, the best way to distill that.
Exactly. And, you know, it's interesting. There's quite a spectrum. And I love that you use the phrase speak for itself, because it doesn't. You have to speak for yourself. And again, you don't want to overdo that to the point of, you know, waving banners and pom-poms all the time and seeming too slick or, you know, transactional or opportunistic. But if you don't represent yourself in terms of speaking up, asking for opportunities and promotions, a lot of people are very hesitant to do that, thinking it might not be appropriate or it might backfire. All of these potential choices have to do with how you engage in them, how you construct them, timing. And that's that social nuance, understanding relationship dynamics. And, you know, if you want to set up an appointment with your boss to talk about your career path, well, do it. Don't wait for them to give you an opportunity, because everybody has their own priorities. Your boss is also concerned with their own career, their trajectory, their reputation in the firm. So you need to manage yours and not wait to be asked. You need to do the asking or the presenting, and to take opportunity to demonstrate not just your skills, because when you give a presentation, yes, the content matters, but people tend to labor over, for instance, the PowerPoint or the proposal, and spend very little time and invest limited effort or attention into how they're presenting it. Now, of course, if you're sending information electronically, that doesn't matter, because then it's all content. But in terms of your own delivery, you are the primary influencer. And again, it's assumed that you have the content in terms of the substance, the experience, and the actual information or recommendations. But if you don't present, deliver that, and offer that powerfully and persuasively, then again, it really loses value. And I will add, since we're talking to financial experts, that Warren Buffett, the famous Warren Buffett, was quite shy as he began his career. And he was unprepared in his own telling to sell, to market himself. He knew he was a good stock picker. He knew he had recommendations that would serve people well. but he couldn't get that across. So he actually took himself to Dale Carnegie, if you're familiar with that brand, How to Influence People. And he applied himself to those principles in terms of everything we're talking about today. And in effect, playing the role. And sometimes there is a little role playing involved, as I said, until you internalize some of these behaviors and make them your own. He had to assign himself, in a sense, to break free of his shell and stop putting his head down and only looking at the numbers and only focusing on the markets, and then assuming people would, be dazzled by his expertise and success. They weren't until he communicated it. And he has a wonderful quote that if you invest in and improve your communication skills, you will increase your market value by 50%. Whether that's opportunity, earnings, it's that significant and that substantial. And we might not know his name so well if he hadn't done that.
Very interesting. So on that topic of bedazzling people, so now we're in an environment where it's interesting because at 55, 35, 10, the 55 is a lot to do, as you mentioned, with your visual appearance. And now my visual appearance is reduced to a box, and I'm, neck up for the most part. So things like body language, what I'm wearing, what purse I'm carrying, none of that stuff really matters. But that 35 is a little bit, it's harder because how do I now, without using my hands all over the place, without standing and pacing around the room, how do I communicate? And more challengingly, how do I communicate when it's when it's a team meeting with 30 people and it's for 30 minutes? So you have to get you have to make an impression, but you have a limited amount of time. So maybe you can spend a little bit of time on some tangible sort of small steps that people can take in both that 55% and the 35%, when you're to make the best impression you can while inside a rectangular box.
Definitely. And in fact, I like to say that even incremental improvement can have exponential impact. So you're right, there are limitations to speaking within a box, which is how we look and appear to people. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to bring in a few more props. Number one, you may recognize this tape measure. Now think about this. I'm measuring my computer, my laptop right now. It is almost 13 inches wide, and this will be a little awkward. The screen is only, wow, it's getting smaller and smaller. It's only 8 inches. Now you may have larger screens. Most people do not have movie theater arrangements. That's all the space you've got. That's all the space you've got. So you need to make the most of it. And as I said, you want your background, doesn't have to be blank, but you want it to be intentional. And that's really what all of this is about: being deliberate, being intentional, being your own editor. And authenticity, the concept and the word authenticity is very big in our business and personal worlds today. I'm not against authenticity. We don't want to be fake and we don't want to pretend to be someone else, but we do want to be the best versions of ourselves. And that's what I call edited authenticity. And one real pitfall that people don't realize is that when you're at home, and I know there are all the jokes about the sweatpants and the no pants and the Zoom shirts, when you're broadcasting from home, no, you don't need a suit. And by the way, I put on the jacket because I want to give that demonstration of some formality. But if I wasn't the presenter, I probably wouldn't have it on. But I am not wearing a t-shirt or a sweatshirt, just as Mithra's casual, but she's not sloppy or unkempt. And so many people have veered way too far in the comfortable, authentic end, that they're not representing themselves in a polished way. We don't have to be formal, but we do want to have some structure. And that means, as basic as it sounds, Washing and combing your hair, making an effort every time you appear on screen to look camera ready, even if that's not to accept an Oscar, but camera ready in terms of making advantageous impressions. And because you are scrutinized more on the small screen, you know, I just measured mine. What did I say? It was 11. This is why I'm not in finance. 11 or 13
by 8.
Thank you, by 8. You're in charge of me, Mitra, when it comes to the stats. As I look around my apartment, or as you would look around a conference room, I see things. I see a painting, I see the couch, there's the window. Oh, it's snowing. If I was in a conference room or a more typical business setting, I would have things to focus on, as would all of you. But right now we've got that small screen, and especially when everyone's visible, you're not supposed to be what I call multitasking and paying no attention. So you're focused on a very finite, in a very finite space. And for that reason, again, the packaging, I love doing this, the packaging really matters. Because if your packaging is too relaxed and too comfortable, then you're going to lose impact. Also, I'm going to turn my laptop around and hope I don't disconnect everything. A ring light, let's get to my ring light. There it is. A ring light is an incredible advantage. So when Mithra mentioned, you know, we may not have the Hollywood lighting, we can have the ring light. It costs about $70. They're easy to purchase. I guarantee you they're all over the web, and they're available many, many places. The ring light actually gives you better lighting. Your lighting should come from the front. So even if you're using a regular lamp or a window, you don't want the light coming from behind you. It will shadow your face completely. Another thing, let me demonstrate a bit. You don't want to be too far back. And some people seem like they're all the way across the room, or they're leaning back, which makes you look disengaged, sometimes bored, or even hostile. So you want to treat every high stakes opportunity or high impact opportunity as a presentation, even if you're not giving the presentation. That's the key, because you're going to be noticed. And that's also different when you've got a gallery view. And of course, people choose their own views. So you may not have the gallery view. Yeah, the witness protection program from BJ. Exactly. You look like you might have a bag over your head, speaking of paper bags. So you want to keep in mind that you may be seen all the time. You may be seen all the time. And in fact, Mithra, I didn't tell you, but when we were talking yesterday, I had my video on, you did not. And because I couldn't see you, I started, I'm sure, to play with my hair and do some weird things. So keep your video on so that you can see what you're doing. And keep in mind, other people may see you, even if you have speaker view and you're only focused on one person. And then the other thing that's important to realize, again, if you have interruptions, just acknowledge them. If you're the speaker, excuse me while I turn off the phone, or excuse me, I just want to tell my child to go back to their homework. Be relaxed about it, because remember, poise is a big part of gravitas. And if you panic, if you overreact, if you start apologizing, now you don't want to interrupt people constantly with home matters. So you want to anticipate, again, if it's a high stakes, high impact opportunity, you do want to prevent distractions as best you can. But apologies, and this is what I call the language of leadership, apologies are not advantageous unless you've really done something to offend someone or made a mistake, then that's warranted. So the language of leadership, as I like to call it, number one, is powerful. Instead of yeah, okay, it's yes, absolutely, I'd be delighted, I'm on it. And precise. You know, we overuse a lot of words, although we have a lot of vocabulary. One word that we use constantly, it's a positive adjective, and we insert it. I'm not going to say it yet. The vacation was blank. The presentation was blank. Lunch was blank. What's the word that we overuse? Hint, it starts with a G, but it's not gravitas. And I've seen it used multiple times in one email. And it is great. Gabrielle got the prize. Oh, hello, Gabrielle. So great. Get away from great. It's become almost meaningless. Try to substitute. And in fact, let me ask all of you right now, 10 adjectives that are positive and more descriptive than great. And I will not accept good or awesome. Let's go. Wonderful, informative, fantastic, lovely, meaningful, engaging, gave me tools to use. So I didn't count. Well done. Exactly. Get away from great, because maybe lunch was great, but actually the technical definition, the Webster's definition of great, is awesome. And the real definition of awesome is big, like the Grand Canyon. That's what great really means. So lunch wasn't great, it was delicious or something like that. So thank you all. And you all have those rich, interesting vocabularies, and we don't use them enough. And finally, the last piece of the language of leadership, which should be powerful and precise and never apologetic, is positive. And one of the greatest opportunities, and this goes back to how you can promote yourself without being obnoxious or too obvious. There's a question we're asked almost every day, multiple times a day at the beginning of meetings, when you see someone in the hall, when we're in the hall, or calls you up. What are we asked every day? And we answer it pretty badly. It's a social question. That's it. How are you? Thank you, Peter. How are you? How are things going? How's it been? And how do we typically answer it? With the 4-letter F word. Or we say, okay, the usual, not much. What if you responded to that routine question? Oh, busy is bad. Yeah, busy. We're all busy. You know, get a grip. What if you responded to it without whining and without being boring and without, in effect, dismissing the question, which I know is a convention. But when you're asked, how are you? How are things going? What if you took one of those adjectives? Fantastic. I just heard the most interesting presentation. Thank you very much. What if you said magnificent? We just got a new client. I've been very productive. I like that. And BJ, I'm sure you're prepared to tell people with what, because that's the outcome. When you say to someone, fantastic, they're probably going to say, wow, why? What's going on? And there's your opportunity to do what I call soft self-promotion. So be positive. Unless it's your best friend or family member, don't whine about the weather or the commute or the child who kept you up all night. Say wonderful, say energized, and then they'll ask, wow, why?
I had a colleague once who answered, his trademark answer was never better. And it was great until you realized that was the only thing he answered with every time.
Yeah.
But you are right. It does get people talking. And I appreciate that. That's a great way because, again, I go back to, I know similar to many of our attendees, I've struggled with the idea of the elevator pitch, right? And or the ability to self-promote. And now that's even harder when you're one of 30 boxes on a screen, or when it's just you and your boss talking, and all you're staring at literally is your boss's face, right? And so,
right. So that's, yeah, thank you, Mithra, because you want to be prepared with what I call conversational content. And you can practice this in almost any environment, even though we're not right now, but when we're going to weddings or parties. If you're someone who has trouble making conversation, I like to say small talk is big talk. Don't waste it on the weather. Don't waste it on the how are you, fine. Make it interesting. Come up with questions you can ask, because everybody likes to talk about themselves. but many of us need to be prompted. And of course, the ones who talk about themselves too much should rein it in a little bit. And I'm guilty of that, I admit. But you definitely want to have some conversational content. What questions could you ask your boss if you know you have a meeting coming up? And when these meetings start or these calls begin to evolve, there's always some downtime. There's always some lead up conversation. Participate, but not fine, not much. Participate in a way that's positive and that demonstrates you're engaged and engaging. And people respond to energy. When we're cheerful, when we're positive, it really draws people to us. And that's part of that attraction of gravitas.
This is great. So couple, and we could talk about this for hours, because now as you were talking, I was on Amazon buying a ring light.
Go Mithra.
But one of the things that's interesting, and this is one thing that comes up all the time, because people they feel they're not dressed properly, or they feel they've got a lot of things going on in the background. And rather than address those things, I've seen more and more people that when there's a video call, they'll just dial in, right? And what are your thoughts on, in this world that we're living now, if someone sends you a Zoom or Teams or WebEx, right, the expectation is that you're going to be on video. So is there a certain, and I think if you just dial in when everyone else is on video, is that perceived negatively? Yeah. And then do you have an obligation to let people know, hey, I'm not going to be on camera? Because that, you always get a mixed group on all these video calls, right?
Yes, and this is the question that that may lead to complaint letters, Mithra, so be ready. Yes, number one, you should let people know your intention, because I find it so confusing, and this is the culture in so many companies, when they say, let's set up a call, or I'll set up a call. It's not a call, it's a video. So number one, be as clear as you can, because most of the platforms for video also have dial-in numbers. So it's not always clear whether you're going to be seeing someone or just talking to them. Number two, and you can certainly ask to clarify that. Number two, if it is video, be visible. Again, it's an opportunity to establish yourself, because if you don't turn your camera on, you're hiding. And if other people are on video, number one, it signals that you're not as present as they are. Whether that's true or not, you may be paying more attention. But again, those are the internals. They're not the externals. They're not what people see and respond to. Number two, and Britt, I know that you're intentionally off camera, so I want to point that out. Britt is not hiding from us. But we see her name because she's part of this broadcast. When you're in a meeting, when you're in a group video conference and you see names, it's very, very distracting, because it breaks up the pattern of visuals. If you can't, for any reason, or whether that's a technical issue or something that you've explained, to Mithra's point, yes, I agree, you should say, I'm not going to be on camera because, or please excuse, the fact that I won't be on camera today. Then at least have a photo of yourself. Let's see if we can demonstrate mine. I promise to come back. I guess because it's your system, I don't have my photo. That's really interesting to know, because normally when I turn the camera off and I'm hosting, and I'm going to look into a way to correct that, I have a profile picture of myself. So set yours up, and we'll find out the technical details. Britt probably knows them, so that you have an image of yourself like you would on LinkedIn, and you must have an image of yourself on LinkedIn, a friendly current picture. And if you even need to leave, say you are getting a delivery or something at home has gotten out of hand, put a little note in the chat very quickly, I'll be right back, or excuse me, I'm getting a delivery, so that people don't think you've suddenly checked out, because that does not serve you well. So the basic answer is be on video. And to your initial point, Mithra, when you go to work, go to an office. When we did, and when hopefully we will, or at least part-time, you dressed for work. You were public. So even though we're at home, we may not be formal, as I've said, but we are public. This is not about, a pajama day, unless you're truly sick and have to take that time to yourself. You are expected to be present and also model the behavior of your boss. You don't want to see your boss and not be seen.
That's great. Actually, and what I was going to say to the audience members is we do have about 10 minutes left, so please feel free to suggest any questions on a rolling basis, either in the Q&A or the chat function. But you touched upon something that I think is very important for leaders. So a lot of this advice is great for those of us who are one of many boxes. But if you are the group leader, and if you are, and I had this conversation with someone who's the head of a division. And he was saying, when I have a team meeting, I never know, my instinct is to wear a sport coat, and just because that's me, but what sort of tone should I set for my group, and how are they going to perceive it? Are they going to think I'm stiff, or are they going to, so what's your advice for those of us, for the leaders in this group, and how they should, for them, projecting gravitas is not an issue. It's bequeathed upon them, that authority. So what are some tips and mistakes, or, what's your thoughts for the leaders here?
Absolutely. There are three things I recommend to leaders. Number one, you are modeling behavior. So even though you have the embedded power, that doesn't mean that other people aren't judging you in every way. They're judging you as a person and a professional, but they're also judging you as a kind of benchmark for their own habits or behaviors, and to your point, even how they present themselves in terms of dress. So you want to, model behaviors that you want other people to follow. Now, having said that, you don't want to be overly formal in any way. So I recommend that team leaders, while we're in this very confusing and I should say uncharted environment, it would be helpful to say to your team, look, I want everybody to be relaxed at home. However, if you're going to be client facing, if you're going to be interacting with other business units or other senior leaders at the organization, I would prefer, or I recommend, or I expect you, depending on what the appropriate tone is for that particular person or group, to wear a jacket or to dress as though you were in the office. So, that depends on your business, your office culture, but there should be some consistency with the team, and the leader needs to, or is advised to, in my opinion, set that tone. The third thing is you do want people to feel comfortable. It's not about the clothes, but it's more opening meetings, maybe asking people how they're doing, or sometimes, and we're all tired of cocktails, but sometimes if you can break things up, even with a few minutes, for a trivia contest, for one person on the team to share the most embarrassing thing that's happened to them since they've been using the video conferencing. There are lots of ways to make people feel not only comfortable, but also connected. And it's often very helpful in terms of personal, how shall I say, personal, I guess it is comfort psychologically to know what's expected, because to your point, Mithra, nobody does know. So if there's a kind of paradigm put forward by the team leader, that's really helpful so people know what the boundaries are. And one last thing, yes, there are hierarchies, and there are definitely titles, and there are definitions of level in companies, most companies still. But you can lead at any level, and that's a big part of that self-promotion. The speaking up, the being willing and able to respond to questions energetically and enthusiastically, even if it's just that big small talk, and looking the part, which doesn't mean the way you might interview in our typical environments, but looking ready to interact with almost anyone.
That's great. A question actually just got sent to me on the chat function. So to your point about the small talk, how does, when you're in a large group setting, sometimes the small talk can go into the way of everybody just talking all over each other. And what are some quick and easy tips to make yourself heard in a larger group setting on video when maybe you're not sitting right next to the boss? Or what are some ways to make an easy impression?
Sure, absolutely. First of all, again, it's helpful for a leader to set those ground rules. You know, for instance, I'm going to ask everybody to mute, and if you'd like to contribute, raise your hand or use the hand raise function. I actually like a human hand going up. Again, that contributes to, at least sends a signal that we are in the room together, that we are human beings. When you speak up, don't be hesitant. Don't apologize. Don't pause. Just get right to the point. Be audible and even lean forward a little. Just watch out with gesturing right in front of the camera. But that leaning forward, as you can see, it completely changes the perspective and it gets attention. You can settle back, but you want to come in. Hello, I have something to say. Say what you mean what you say, and stop talking. Because one of the problems is, and this is a psychological construct, because we are broadcasting remotely, for those of us who don't have a lot of experience in front of the camera or a great deal of comfort or confidence, we sometimes get into our own heads and go off on tangents, which could happen in a real space meeting as well. But it's more likely to happen on video because a very quick technical and physiological fact. We're not really looking at human beings. We're looking at representations of human beings, pixelated images. And it's similar to if you have a pet at home or an animal companion. If I turn on National Geographic and a flock of birds flies across the screen, my cat is not going to react to that. She's going to keep sleeping or just look the other direction. But I guarantee if a bird flew into the apartment, she'd go crazy. So our brains are constantly trying to figure out at a very deep subconscious level, is that a person? Isn't that a person? This is very stressful and it's very confusing. So make it easier for people to see that you're human and to feel that there's life and liveliness to your delivery.
That's great. Thank you. So one of the tips that one of my mentors once gave me is, if you want to maintain credibility, which I think is a big part of Gravitas, start and end your meetings on time. So with that said, I don't think I saw any more questions, but you know, I think this has been, we could talk about this for hours and days, and the more I learn about this stuff, Raleigh, the more I feel I don't know. So, but what I really liked was that I think for everyone here, you gave us some very easily actionable items. And so I'm going to have to put a quarter in a jar every time I say great. And I have a feeling that jar is going to fill up very quickly. But I think those are some great points. And many of the thoughts you shared today regarding skills that are crucial for effective leadership and a successful career are more timely than ever, especially given the unique circumstances that we're living through. I personally feel it all the time, where you can't just grab a coffee with somebody and rely on your surroundings and the ambiance, and it's just you and that person. So a lot of the information that you've provided, I think, is very tangible and actionable. And
I'm happy to hear that. And I'll add one more thing for leaders and hosts of meetings. Don't end the video feed until all of your guests or team members have signed off, because to me, that's the difference between closing the door on people before they've even made it safely out. Exit gracefully, allow everybody to say goodbye or thank them before you shut down the session.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Raleigh. And thank you to everybody who joined. We hope you found today's workshop to be productive. The Roundtable's next gathering will be our pre-President's Day virtual cocktail networking event on February 11th, where participants will have the opportunity to network with one another in small groups. And be on the information, look out for information on some of our other upcoming events, including our next Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion workshop in March. We hope you enjoyed today's presentation. Stay safe, stay healthy, and enjoy the rest of your week. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Britt. Thank you, Raleigh.
My pleasure.